Hey, I'm Dr. SCL. I'm a dad, a chiropractor, and the translator you didn't know you needed in this, the first year of parenting. This is Decoded, the first year, the podcast that turns baby brain confusion, mum burnout, and milestone panic into clarity you can actually use. Let's make sense of the chaos by decoding it together. We're going to do something a little different over the next few episodes. We're going to slow things down and look at development through one lens at a time, one primitive reflex at a time. Because when you understand the individual pieces, the whole picture of your child's development starts to make a lot more sense. And there's only one place to make sense of starting: the Moro Reflex. Not because it's the most talked about, but because it's the one that shapes how your baby experiences the world from the very beginning. It's their first alarm system. It's their first response to stress, and it's their first layer of protection. And when this reflex is working well, everything else has a stable foundation from which to build. But when it's overactive or lingering, it can show up in ways most parents don't realize are connected. So if you've ever felt like your baby is jumpy, unsettled, or just a bit on edge, you're going to want to understand this one. Let's unpack it. If there's one reflex that shapes a baby's experience of the world more than any other, it's the Moro Reflex. Often called the startle reflex, but that name doesn't really do it justice. Because the Moro Reflex isn't just about being jumpy, it's about survival. The Moro Reflex is the nervous system's early alarm system and is driven by the brainstem and vestibular systems. In other words, it's driven by parts of the brain that are associated with movement and coordination and balance. And the job of the Moro Reflex is very simple. Am I safe, or do I need to react? Do I need to move away from a threat or danger? In a newborn, this reflex is essential. It helps initiate the very first breath. It supports feeding. It orients the baby to change its position, sound, and movement, in response to, I should say. This reflex is meant to be strong early on, but over time, as the nervous system matures, the Moro Reflex should gradually integrate into more regulated responses. Not disappear, integrate. When that integration is happening smoothly, a baby becomes better able to self-soothe, handle sensory input, and move with ease through space. But when the Moro Reflex stays highly active for longer than it needs to, the nervous system stays on high alert. And this is where parents start noticing things. A baby who startles easily, who struggles to settle, who seems tense, wired, or easily overwhelmed. Now, it's easy and tempting to label this as temperament or sensitivity, or it's just how they are. But very often, what you're seeing is a nervous system that is still prioritizing safety over skill development. And here's the key reframe. A baby who is focused on safety cannot fully invest in development, because exploration of their world requires a sense of security. This is why we don't talk about strength or milestones first. We talk about regulation. A regulated nervous system is calmer. Breathing becomes more rhythmic. Muscle tone becomes more adaptable instead of rigid. And that is what creates the foundation for head control, rolling, sitting, and all things beyond. This is also why pushing milestones too early can very commonly backfire. If a baby is encouraged into positions or movements before their nervous system feels safe enough, the Moro Reflex often stays switched on. Movement may still happen, but it happens with tension, with effort, and ultimately with compensation. It can look like progress, but internally the system is still bracing, and the nervous system keeps track of that. This is why some babies who hit their milestones on time still feel unsettled, rigid, or dysregulated. Nothing is wrong with them. Their nervous system just hasn't been given enough opportunity to downshift out of survival mode and move into development mode. So instead of asking, why isn't my baby calmer yet? A useful question may be, does my baby feel safe enough to let go? Safety isn't a parenting style, it's a neurological state. And when safety is present, development doesn't need to be forced, it unfolds. This is why calm is not a bonus in development, it's the foundation. And when we honour that first, everything else becomes easier to build. Now, once you understand the Moro Reflex as a safety response, a lot of everyday struggles suddenly start to make more sense. Not as problems to solve, but as signals to interpret. So let's start with sleep. A baby with an active Moro Reflex often sleeps lightly. They may startle themselves awake, struggle with transitions, and seem to need more help settling than other babies. This isn't because they're a bad sleeper. It's because sleep requires a nervous system to fully let go, and a system that is still prioritizing safety doesn't let go easily. Now, that doesn't mean there's anything wrong, it just means the nervous system is still doing its job. And this is the argument and the conversation around topics such as swaddling. The argument for swaddling is it helps the baby regulate when their Moro Reflex is highly active so that they can start to develop good sleep habits when they're very, very young. The counter argument to that is that the Moro Reflex will still be dominant whether the child is swaddled or not. And by forcing something upon the child, we're creating abnormal patterns. This is not the time or the place for me to dive into the pros and cons of swaddling and come to a solution, but it's a question that I encourage every single parent to ask. Now we're going to dive into feeding. And feeding is one of the most neurologically demanding tasks a baby does. It requires coordination between breathing, sucking, swallowing, all of it while staying regulated. When the Moro is highly active, you see feeds that are effortful. They're short, the baby pulls on and off the breast, they arch, they need frequent breaks. And again, this is not a feeding failure. It's often a baby saying, there's a lot for my nervous system to deal with right now. And finally, one of the most critical elements of pediatric development, tummy time or floor time. It asks the baby to work against gravity, while their sense of safety is still developing. Now, for a nervous system with an active Moro Reflex, that can feel overwhelming. So the resistance you see isn't stubbornness, it's protection. This is why forcing tummy time rarely helps, and why short, supported, well-timed exposure is far more valuable than stressful long sessions filled with nothing but distress for both mum and bub. Here's the important part. None of this means you need to do more. It means you're allowed to stop asking, why is this hard? And start asking, what is my baby telling me about their nervous system today? Safety first, then stability, then skill. That order never changes. And when parents understand this, the pressure quietly dissolves, because development stops being a performance and becomes a relationship. So if there's one thing I want you to take away from today, it's this. Your baby isn't overreacting. Their nervous system is communicating. And when we understand the Moro Reflex through that lens, everything starts to make a lot more sense. You're not missing anything. You're not behind. You're just being invited to look a little deeper. Because when the nervous system feels safe, startle becomes stability, and chaos becomes coordinated development. If this episode gave you a little bit of clarity and you're starting to see your baby's patterns differently, firstly, share it with another mum. All mums need to know this stuff. Secondly, I've put together something for you, my baby milestone decoder, to help you connect the dots between reflexes, movement, and development. Reach out through the socials and send me a DM with the word decode in it, and you'll get a copy. And as always, you don't need to do everything. You just need to understand what matters. Dr. SCL, out. Thanks for listening to Decoded, the first year, where we translate the mess of early parenting into something that actually makes sense. Be sure to share this episode with a friend, a partner, or a mum that you know who is quietly struggling through the noise and secretly Googling every milestone. If you want to hear more decoding, follow @Mount Hawthorne Chiropractic on the socials. Let's keep decoding the chaos. No mansplaining, no pressure, no judgment, just clarity when you need it most. Please note, this podcast isn't medical advice. It's just smart strategies from a Gonstead chiropractor, a dad, and someone who's been in the room with hundreds of mums trying to make sense of their baby's development, their own postpartum recovery, and the constant noise that comes with modern parenting. Always chat with your health team for specific care.